260 feet underground, running the entire 1.45-mile span of the Three Gorges Dam, is a maintenance gallery cut straight through solid concrete. Press your hand against the surface and you'll feel a steady low vibration in the concrete that never lets up, because on the other side of that wall, 39.3 billion cubic meters of water are pushing against it every hour of every single day. Every few months a video shows up online making the same claim. The Three Gorges Dam is collapsing. These videos pull tens of millions of views, and they leave a lot of people genuinely wondering whether the largest dam ever built is about to give way. So, is it actually collapsing? The dream of this dam goes back more than a century. Sun Yat-sen, the founder of modern China, first proposed it in 1919. Mao Zedong wrote a poem about it in 1956. For decades, it stayed exactly that, a dream passed between generations of planners who could never quite agree on whether to build it. Then, in December 1994, after 75 years of debate, the work finally started. For nearly 2 decades, over 40,000 workers cycled through the site, with up to 26,000 on the ground at peak. The official price tag landed at $32 billion. The real figure, once you factor in moving 1.3 million people, the follow-up infrastructure and ongoing maintenance costs, has been estimated at close to $60 billion, and it has never stopped climbing. This is a concrete gravity dam where the weight of the concrete itself holds back the river with nothing else supporting it. The wall stands 607 feet tall, roughly a 60-story building, and stretches 1.45 miles across the Yangtze. Building it required 27.2 million cubic meters of concrete. Tucked behind that wall, 32 turbines, each one weighing 6,000 tons, generate 22,500 megawatts of electricity combined, which is roughly the same output as 15 full-scale nuclear power plants running all at once. The reservoir created behind the dam stretches 373 miles upstream and holds 39.3 billion cubic meters of water. And before any of that water was let in, 13 cities went under the surface, along with 140 towns and 1,352 villages. More than 1,000 years of continuous human settlement along those riverbanks was absorbed into the reservoir. Before any of that happened, the project had to clear a vote. On April 3, 1992, China's National People's Congress put it to a decision, and the result was 1,767 delegates in favor, 177 against, with 664 abstaining and another 25 casting no vote at all. That is 67% approval. China's legislature votes close to unanimous on major national projects almost every time. A full third of delegates opposing or refusing to endorse this dam was, for that institution, extraordinary, and the loudest objections were coming from engineers and scientists. Li Peng, the premier who had trained as a hydraulic engineer in the Soviet Union, had been pushing this dam as his defining legacy. He had his majority, and the vote went through. 17 years of construction, a project that reshaped an entire river, and yet the videos keep coming. So what exactly are they pointing at? Before writing this off as clickbait, consider 3 events that are on the public record. In 2019, images circulated online that appeared to show the dam had warped significantly. China's official response was that the dam had shifted only millimeters under water load, within the normal design parameters for any concrete gravity dam. The apparent deformation in the photos turned out to be a satellite imaging artifact caused by how the imagery was processed. But the admission buried in that response was real. The dam moves because any concrete structure holding back that volume of water does. In August 2020, the Yangtze delivered the largest flood peak since the dam's completion. China cut external access to hydrological data during the worst days of the flooding. Nobody outside the country could verify whether the wall was holding. And in corruption investigations conducted since 2014, senior engineers and executives at the Three Gorges Group, the same people responsible for the structure's integrity, have been arrested and prosecuted for corruption. Every one of those videos is pointing at something real. The problem is that none of them give you the full picture you need to reach your own verdict. By the end of this, you'll have it. You decide what to call it. The central engineering challenge of pouring 27.2 million cubic meters of concrete is heat. The chemical reaction that cures concrete generates enormous internal heat, enough at the core of the wall to nearly boil water, while the exterior simultaneously cools and contracts. The concrete is fighting against itself from the inside out. Left unmanaged, it tears through. The solution at Three Gorges was tens of thousands of steel cooling pipes woven through the entire wall, pumping chilled water continuously through every section as it cured. That system required total discipline on every single pour, on every shift, from the first worker to the last. Not to mention the construction was not always disciplined. In 2000, a whistleblower exposed systemic theft of funds meant for displaced families at every level of local government. The connection to the construction budget was straightforward. If money earmarked for the people who were forced to leave was being redirected, the same risk sat inside every materials contract. China's own National Audit Office later confirmed bid irregularities across 434 contracts totaling 12 billion yuan between 2010 and 2014. Several international engineering firms raised concerns about the site's geology and construction standards during the bidding process. Some withdrew rather than proceed under those conditions, and the concerns they documented were never made public. The government built it with domestic contractors. That same organization, whose engineers China's own courts are now prosecuting, was responsible for every pour. The question isn't whether corners were cut, it's which ones. Then, in 2002, with the reservoir filling for the first time, inspectors walked the face of the dam. They found 80 cracks. Some were hairline fractures barely visible to the naked eye. Others were wide enough to slide a credit card into. A few were already wet, meaning water was moving through the wall before the river had even reached its designed operating level. The official response called it surface crazing, which is normal in large concrete structures. Epoxy was applied to the gaps, and paint covered the rest. Huang Li had earned his master's degree at Cornell University and his doctorate at the University of Illinois. He came back to China by choice, out of genuine loyalty to the country he wanted to help build. In the 1950s, he was the only engineer willing to go on record opposing the Sanmenxia Dam on the Yellow River, arguing that the river's silt load would eventually destroy the dam's usefulness. For saying that, the government labelled him a rightist and sent him to years of hard labour. He was still alive when Sanmenxia failed in exactly the way he described. When the Three Gorges project moved into its planning phase in the 1980s and 90s, Huang wrote 6 letters to the Central Committee asking for just 30 minutes to present his analysis. He was turned away every time. What he warned about has since been confirmed by decades of measurement. Chongqing's harbour choking with sediment, Poyang Lake steadily losing surface area, upstream flood levels rising during years with perfectly normal rainfall, ecological deterioration spreading across the lower river. Every prediction he made is now backed by documented data. He died of cancer on August 27, 2001, while construction was still ongoing 373 miles away. He left his son one instruction: please tell them, do not block the river. The dam was completed, and the river was blocked. Huang Li predicted all 3 of these. Every letter he sent went unanswered. Here is what the operational record now confirms. The Yangtze historically carried around 500 million tons of sediment every year. The dam traps it. The flushing sluices built into the design cannot reach where the silt actually settles because it drops miles upstream before it ever reaches the wall. The riverbed above the dam is gradually rising, which means flood levels increase even in dry years. The 6,000-ton turbines built to last decades are being continuously ground down by abrasive particles suspended in the water. The dam was engineered to stop floods. The sediment it captures is quietly raising the flood ceiling for every community sitting upstream. China has already had to demolish more than 300 upstream dams just to slow the sediment flow reaching the reservoir. The silt keeps accumulating. The second problem is the ground itself. Filling a reservoir with 39.3 billion cubic meters of water loads the Earth's crust and lubricates fault lines. The Zheguibadong and Zhuiwanshi faults, both documented in engineering literature before construction started and flagged by the firms that withdrew from bidding, run directly through the dam site. In the first 6 years after the reservoir filled, 3,429 earthquakes were recorded in the reservoir zone. The structure has now been under full load for more than 20 years, and accumulated stress behaves differently from the elastic deformation a structure can simply shed. The third problem shows up in how the dam is being managed. Since 2020, Chinese government statements have increasingly acknowledged that the country cannot rely on the Three Gorges alone for flood control on the Yangtze. In practice, during severe flood seasons, operators release water downstream to protect the dam itself, and the communities below it bear the consequences. The wall built to protect the Yangtze Plain has repeatedly become the reason the plain floods. In 2020, all three of these problems arrived in the same summer. For 48 hours, nobody outside China had access to the data that would tell them what was happening inside the wall. Info climbed from 40,000 to 50,000 to 75,000 cubic meters per second. At that peak rate, every single second passing a fixed point on the river was equivalent to roughly 30 fully loaded supertankers of water moving through it. The water level climbed, past 160 meters, past 163, past 164. On August 22nd, it peaked at 167.85 meters, with just 7 meters of clearance before the 175-meter design maximum. China shut off external hydrological data. Satellites tracked the downstream water plume. The official data signal went dark, and state television ran its regular programming. Yicheng, a city of 4 million people located 25 miles downstream, went partially underwater. To keep the reservoir from overtopping the dam, operators opened the spillways and sent that water straight into the communities below. The structure, built to prevent catastrophic flooding, caused flooding. There are also 4 more massive dams feeding directly into the Three Gorges Reservoir from the Jinsha River upstream: Wudongde, Baihetan, Shiluodu, and Xiangjiaba. Baihetan alone stands 948 feet tall, taller than the Three Gorges itself, and ranks as the second largest hydropower station in the world. The Three Gorges was designed to withstand a catastrophic natural flood. It was never designed to absorb 4 collapsing upstream dams emptying into it simultaneously. But none of this, not the cracks, not the silt, not 2020, not the cascade, is the reason the dam cannot be saved. The real problem is something no engineer can fix. Because you cannot fix a structure, you can never take apart. Standard concrete in good conditions lasts 100 to 150 years. The Three Gorges was built under compromised conditions, carries constant chemical erosion from the water chemistry, and handles relentless thermal stress year-round. Structural estimates point to somewhere in the early 22nd century as the end of the wall's functional life. After that, the options become genuinely grim. You cannot drain the reservoir. Releasing 39.3 billion cubic meters of water downstream creates an instant catastrophic flood on a scale the Yangtze Basin has never experienced. The Yangtze downstream of this wall is home to 400 million people. There is no controlled release scenario. A structural failure here, whether from overtopping, seismic fracture, or foundation undermining, would not look like a managed emergency. It would look like the river deciding the argument. Behind the wall, accumulated industrial and chemical silt from the runoff of 40 million people sits at the bottom of that reservoir. Releasing that material would poison the Yangtze Delta, collapse Pacific coast fisheries, and sterilize one of the most productive river systems in Asia for generations. You cannot demolish it either. The only path forward is to maintain it forever, handing a structure that grows more expensive and more fragile with every decade to every generation that follows. You came here asking whether this dam is collapsing. You've seen the 80 cracks they painted over. You've seen what 2020 looked like. You've seen what the silt does, what the fault lines are doing, and why it can never be taken apart. So, what do you call it? Huang Wanli dedicated his career to stopping it. The river is still running, at least for now. Do you think China can realistically keep the Three Gorges Dam operational for another century, or is the clock already running out? Leave your answer in the comments. Thanks for watching it, and subscribe for more Mega Build stories.